Hello and welcome to episode 4 on image blending. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to composite a model shot, in this particular case, sort of an upper body head shot of a model onto another background. Compositing model shots can be really difficult because it's very hard to blend the hair. And so I'm going to show you a technique that I learned from one of my favorite compositors, Glenn Dewis. So I'm going to show you his technique on this particular image. So let's go ahead and get these images opened. So this is the background shot that we're going to use for the composite. And our model did not come in, so let's grab that again. All right. And here's our model. Now this is Rob Galloway. Rob has his own photography company called Mountain Home Photography in California. And he was taking some test shots and trying to practice sort of his capture. And so this is a selfie actually that he did. I think he did a great job, managed to get his eyes tack sharp, which is a challenge. But I asked him if I could use this image because I felt that it was a great example of just sort of this wispy hair and curls, which is some of the hardest stuff to composite. So we're going to go ahead and use this image for our work. And let's get started on it. So the first thing that we want to do is, instead of just trying to select all of Rob, which would be a really challenge, because Photoshop will actually find it very hard to find the edges when you're selecting such a big sort of object or space, we're going to actually select him in pieces. So we're going to start off by selecting his body, so for his shoulders and his arm, and then we're going to come back and select his head and hair. So let's start this process. First things first, we're going to start our selection with the quick selection tool. So you can hit W or come over and select the quick selection tool from the toolbar. Want to make sure we have a fairly decent size selection tool just to make this easy. This is very similar to what we did in episode 3. So we're just going to go ahead and run our selection tool around and to try to get everything where there's really a solid edge on him. You fix it a little bit right here. Brush smaller and then push back down here. I don't want a bunch of gray. And then we're going to kind of clean up where we are here. We do not want his hair where it's wispy. So we're going to push that out and make that as part of the next selection. All right. And same thing on his other side. Clean that up a little bit. Okay, that's pretty good. Right there. So we have a pretty good selection where we've started to avoid everything where the background is showing through. That's what we're trying to do here, is just not get into anything where you see background coming through. Now, in this next step, we actually need to save this selection. So we're going to go ahead and say select, save selection. And we're going to go ahead and call this body. It says that we're saving it to a new channel, which is perfect. So we're going to hit OK. All right, great. Now we're going to go ahead and deselect. Okay, so now that we have made our selection of Rob's body, we're going to go ahead and start to select his head, face, and hair. So to do this, we're going to use our quick selection tool again. We are going to start making our selection. Again, just like we did last time, I'm going to make a rough selection and then start to kind of refine that selection with our minus. So you see here that we've kind of come around, we've left this little wispy section, that's fine. We want to go with where the hair is dense. We do not want to start trying to pick up the wispy hair in this original selection. We're going to use refine mask for that. So we're going to go ahead and push back a little bit here. Just get rid of these hairs. Push forward again. So you want to be close. It doesn't need to be super precise, but you want to be close enough, and then but not pick it up. You don't want anything where you see the background behind it. So let's fix this, come back in, just fill in a little bit here, and then push back a tad right here. And actually maybe even right there. All right. Something like that should be good, and we'll fix his arm up straight away. Okay, so it looks like a pretty good starting point for our mask. Now we want to go ahead and hit Refine Edge. And as you see, it pops up here in mine in a mask because that's the last way I used it. If you don't have the mask, you can come in here and select it. It's black and white from the view mode. Next, we're going to go ahead and choose Radius. And we're going to let the software do what it can to figure out where the wispy hair actually is. You don't want to go crazy and say, okay, go find it all for me, because when it gets like this and gets muddy, that's not going to look good when you actually create your mask. So you want to be careful and just get the program started. If it starts to get muddy, you just back it off. Oh, that looks okay. A little bit too far at 30, so we'll stop around 25-ish. So the other thing you can do is put on Smart Radius and have it, see if that helps. I don't know that it added much value, so I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that. Next, we want to make sure that we have the Refine Radius tool. So you go ahead, just double check that it's selected, and now we're going to go around the edge and start using the mask and painting in. And you'll see that Photoshop will start adding the wispy hair off the side of his head here. Now, I'm not doing huge areas because it actually makes it hard for the program to understand what it's doing. So you kind of just go slowly, be patient about it, and you'll actually see a fairly good result from the program. Okay, that side actually looks pretty good. I don't want to go too crazy here. There we go. We knew there was one more piece, maybe a little bit right there. And then we're going to come back to the other side and do to the right of his ear. And let's pick up this little bit of hair that we kept out of our selection a moment ago. Okay, I actually think that that looks pretty good. So once we're settled, if we want, we can just add a little bit of contrast to kind of sharpen up those edges a little bit of our mask. Make sure that we check around the top of his head. We haven't missed anything. Perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and say, okay. So even though it doesn't look like we've selected everything, we've actually done a pretty good job getting a mask started. And we're going to go ahead and say select, save selection, and we're going to call this hair. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. Now we can deselect. Great. Now, if you come over to our Channels tab, you'll see that we now have our two selections. We have the body selection and we have the hair selection. But we can't actually use them as two separate selections, so now we actually need to merge these together. The way to do that is start off, you pick either way, but in this particular case, I'm going to start off with body. And then while that is highlighted or selected, I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key, and I'm going to just click on the hair layer. And what we're going to see is that I've now dropped in the marching ants from my original selection. So basically, I loaded that selection onto the layer. Now to make these one, I'm going to say Edit, Fill, and I'm going to make sure that I'm filling the content with white. I'm going to hit OK. So that looks pretty good. Same mask built back in. Now I can go ahead and deselect and take a look and see if I have anything that I need to clean up. And when I'm looking at this, I'm looking for sort of fuzzy edges or whites that have gray in them or blacks that have gray in them. In this case, I think I've got a pretty good selection going. I can clean this up a little bit, and the easiest way to do that is to take our brush tool. In this particular case, I've got gray on white, so I want to make sure my foreground color is white, and I want to make sure that my brush blend mode is in overlay. And as long as I do this, when I paint on the white, it actually gets rid of the gray. But if I were to paint over the edge, it doesn't paint white onto the black, which is really key because we would just be muddying up our selection if we did it that way. So kind of checking around, make sure I've missed anything. It looks pretty good. So I think this is pretty good to go. Now we no longer need the head selection because we're never going to use that on its own. So we're going to drag this over to the garbage can and delete it. This we still have our body, even though it switched back, but by deleting that, it's gone ahead and gone back into the RGB channel. We can go back to layers, our layers panel, and we can go ahead and hit the mask. Oop, my bad. One step too soon. Let's back that up. You just saw what that happened. I hit mask, but there was no selection made. So we have to actually load our selection. So we have it in our channels. We've created the mask, but we have to load it. So we're going to come over to Select and choose Load Selection. Now that we've chosen that, we can come over here and choose Body from the drop-down list of channels and hit OK. Now you see the marching ants and our selection is made. So now we can go ahead and hit the mask. And now we've got Rob and a mask, and you can see where we've done a pretty good job of getting his hair so far. I'm going to show you how to actually make this just a bit better in a minute. So now we need to move Rob into his new home in the new background. So to do that, we're going to choose the Move tool. You can either select that from the top of your toolbar or hit the V key till you get the mouse, the pointer with the arrows. We're going to left click and hold, carry him up, hover over our new image, bring our mouse back in, and drop Rob into our image. I'm going to back this up a little bit so we can sort of make more sense of this. We need to get him squared away so he looks right. Now right away you can see that we've done a really good job. His hair actually looks pretty good. Part of our problem though is the background doesn't make any sense behind him, and that's because the perspective of the original background, he was really tight on his background, and that actually doesn't let him sit properly in something that's far away from him. So what we need to do is actually manipulate our background layer so that it makes more sense and it feels like it's close, like the original background. So we can do that pretty easily. We're going to go ahead, choose our background layer, unlock the layer, turn this layer into a smart object so as we move it, we're not damaging pixels, but stretching the pixels, and hit free transform. We get our bounding bars, and now we can start manipulating the background so it fits better behind him. So, not quite there. Go ahead. We're going to push him out a little bit further. We're going to continue to stretch, continue to push. The only reason I'm pushing back is because it makes it a little bit easier to get this background behind him properly. Okay, so now we can go ahead and bring him back forward. All right, so let's do some cleanup on this mask of ours. So now we want to fix our mask up, and we have a couple of things that we need to fix. So let's bring this up so we can see this a little better. First and foremost, we have a halo, and we have a little bit here, but I'm going to fix that a different way. But you can see that there's a little halo around the rest of his arm and his shirt, and that's because he was on such a bright background. And we're going to go ahead and fix that. So first things first, we're going to grab our lasso tool. So right up here, you'll see it says lasso tool, or you can hit the L key to make sure we have the lasso. And we're going to do a selection around the edges of his body that have straight lines. So around his arm, and then come back so we meet the other side. You see we have the marching ants, and you can tell where we've got this selection made. Now again, we're handling the hair a different way, so not so important to worry about this right now. What we're really focused on is his shoulder and arm. Now that our selection's made and we're on our thumbnail, we can go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, make sure that we're at 2% for blur, and hit OK. Now, that only affected the selected area. So even though in the little picture it showed some of his hair was blurry, it doesn't matter. It's not where we selected. It only blurred the selection, and you can sort of see that the edges of his arm and shoulder now have a blur to it. But we're not done because we don't want to leave that blurry. What we're trying to do is get rid of our halo. So to do that, we're now going to choose Image, Adjustments, Levels, or Command Control L. Now that we have our levels adjustment, just like in episode 3, we're going to go ahead, drag our darks towards our lights, and you will see that that halo disappeared. So while I'm doing this, instead of watching me in the levels table, keep your eye right here on his bicep. Now, I'm going to drag across, and you can see that halo just disappear. It's really amazing. So such a great technique for getting rid of halos. Now we're going to go ahead and say OK and deselect. So now we've fixed part of our problem, which is the halo sitting around his arm. Now we want to fix his hair. And this is going to fix both this halo at the top of his head and also help the hair stand out where it's kind of light. To do this, we're actually going to use a layer style. So we're going to come over here to our layer with Rob, double click to get layer styles, and you'll have this dialog box come up. Now earlier in another episode we went ahead and played with the blend if. We're going to do something different. This time we're actually going to pick a style, and we're going to choose inner shadow. So go ahead and click on the line. Now you have to be really careful here because as you saw, this panel on the right changed. Let's go back and see that again. If we start off with blending options, these are our blending options. If all I had done is check or uncheck the box, it added the inner shadow, but I didn't get any options to make change. So to be able to get the sort of options that go with inner shadow available to me, I have to actually select the line item. And now you can see this panel has changed. Inner shadow by definition is set to multiply. That's perfect. This will usually come up as black, but it's kind of sticky, so it's kept what I've used in the past. So we're going to go ahead and change the color just so we can go through the steps. Click on the color panel. You end up with a color picker. Well, right now you see that the color picker is like this circle and I can pick colors. But in this particular case, I want to actually make the shadow a similar color as to Rob's hair. So to do that and to get the chooser, the color picking tool, the eyedropper, all I need to do is take my mouse and pull it over to my image. And you can see now that over on his head, the mouse is turned into a dropper. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of click sort of a moderate color in his hair, and you can see that the color picker over here has now relocated itself in sort of to the tone of his hair. And I can bounce around. I mean, no matter where I click, you can see that it's changing. But because I want to shadow his hair, this is what I want to pick as a color, someplace similar. So if you had a blonde, you would pick, something that made sense in blonde hair. Dark hair, you'd pick darker color. Gray hair, you'd pick a gray. So anyway, now that I've picked this, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. I'm not quite done. I want to go ahead and play with the opacity. And if you look at his hair, now there is also a shadow on his arm, but we're going to fix that in a minute. If you watch his hair, you'll see that when I bring the opacity down, that's the original state. But as I start to drag this up, you can see that it starts to get darker. The other thing is we want to make sure our angle of light is correct, and we want the light to be coming straight down. So you can either dial in 90 or you can just type in 90. You can see now that our hair has actually improved quite a bit. So look at the curls on his hair down here as I move back and forth. Much better on the hair. Okay, looks much more realistic. So you can change size and distance. I tend to leave them around 8. It's not, just whatever feels comfortable for whatever image that you're working on. Once we get here, we want to see, okay, I do want to highlight that the shadow on his head has disappeared. Now I actually think that maybe our distance is a little bit too high there because it's got a dark line on his hair. So I'm going to back that off. Now I'm about down to 4 pixels, so now it's not a dark line around the top of his head. So now that we're here, we're going to say, okay, now we're not done because part of that inner shadow has now made this really dark edge. And we just went to all that trouble to get the shadow and halo off of his arm. We don't want it on his body. So how do we fix that? Well, in theory, you would mask it. Problem is that we can't add another mask to this. So what we have to do is separate the inner shadow from Rob, then use a mask. So to do that, where it says inner shadow below the layer where Rob is, we're going to right click on that and say create layer. And you can tell here that it's gone ahead, it's taken that inner shadow layer and made a layer of its own. You can see this little arrow pointing down, meaning that this inner shadow is only affecting the Rob layer. And now we can add a mask. So let's go ahead and do that. Whoops, didn't mean to add it. Added it to the wrong place because I wasn't on the inner shadow layer. So I have to select that layer. Perfect. Now add a mask. The white mask is revealing all of the inner shadow on Rob, including his arms and his shoulders. So now we want to go ahead and pick our brush tool. We want to go up to the options and make sure that we're no longer an overlay, but we're back to normal. We want to make sure that our brush is soft edged, and we want to make sure that our foreground color is black because we're going to now hide the shadow from certain parts of this image. So now that we have black, we have our opacity and flow at 100%. We're going to paint the inner shadow off the edge of his arm. So go ahead and just go around the edge of his body. Now we don't want to go over his hair because all of that work was to make the hair darker. So boom. Now Rob looks pretty good. All right, so now you can see how you can select an object with nice wavy hair and actually see through it. And it's, it takes practice to get this to get this to work, but you can see that we've done a really good job. You can see the graffiti behind him, and it feels natural. You see all the little curls and wisps of his hair. That's a pretty impressive way of getting to this selection and not seeing gray behind him, because that's really the challenge. So that is a quick way of doing it. It does take practice. You're going to find that using the Refine Edge tool can be really challenging, but all in all, I think it's a pretty spectacular way of actually getting hair selected with using Photoshop tools. In our next episode, we're actually going to do some post-processing on Rob, show some dodge and burn techniques, how to enhance the eyes, and make him fit his image just a bit better. So stay tuned.